The psychological impact was devastating for German crews. Panzer Ace Otto Carius wrote years later, "At Aracourt, we learned that our technological superiority meant nothing if we couldn't get fuel to our tanks, couldn't replace our trained crews, and couldn't coordinate with our infantry and artillery. The Americans had turned tank warfare into something we didn't recognize, a symphony of combined arms where every element supported every other element." American tank commander Captain James Leach captured the reality in a letter home. The Germans still think this war is about having the biggest gun and the thickest armor. They don't understand that we've made the entire battlefield our weapon. When their Panthers advance, they're not facing 5 Shermans. They're facing 5 Shermans, 12 artillery batteries, 16 P-47 Thunderbolts, and a logistical system that can replace every tank they destroy within 48 hours. For decades, military historians perpetuated the myth that American armor was inferior and that Sherman crews were simply braver than their German counterparts. This narrative, popularized by books like Death Traps, painted the Sherman as a Ronson lighter, a tank that would brew up at the first enemy hit. According to this mythology, American tank crews only survived through numerical superiority and sheer luck. The historical reality is far more sophisticated and impressive. The Sherman wasn't designed to be invulnerable. It was designed to be effective. While German engineers added layer after layer of armor, creating tanks that were mechanical marvels but logistical nightmares, American designers focused on reliability, maintainability, and tactical flexibility. The Sherman's weakness, its thinner armor, was actually a calculated trade-off. Thinner armor meant lighter weight, which meant the Sherman could cross bridges that would collapse under a Panther. It meant Shermans could be transported by ship, by rail, and by truck to anywhere in the world. It meant 2 Shermans could be produced for every Panther, and more importantly, 5 Sherman crews could be trained for every Panzer crew. At Aracourt, German Panthers averaged 3.2 mechanical breakdowns per day, while American Shermans averaged 0.4 breakdowns per day. German tank recovery took an average of 14 hours due to the Panther's complexity and weight, while disabled Shermans were back in action within 4 hours on average. The myth also ignores tactical innovation. American tank crews at Aracourt didn't charge headlong into German guns. They used coordinated fire and movement tactics that German crews had never encountered. While one Sherman provided covering fire, others maneuvered to flanking positions. American tankers called in artillery strikes within 90 seconds of spotting targets, while German requests for fire support took an average of 12 minutes to process through their rigid command structure. As the sun set on September 23, 1944, Staff Sergeant Poole surveyed the battlefield littered with burning Panthers and realized something profound. The age of the knight-errant tank was over. The Germans had built medieval war machines for an industrial war, creating individual champions, while the Americans had built an integrated weapon system that treated tanks as just one component of a larger military organism. The lesson of Aracourt wasn't that American tanks were better than German tanks. It was that American tank doctrine was superior to German tank doctrine. While Germany's engineers pursued the perfect tank, America's strategists had created the perfect tank force, sustainable, trainable, and adaptable. In the end, the 5 Shermans that shocked the German high command at Aracourt represented something far more dangerous than thick armor or powerful guns. They represented American industrial democracy applied to warfare. The revolutionary idea that victory comes not from building the best individual weapon, but from building the best system for producing, training, supplying, and coordinating thousands of good weapons. The German obsession with technological perfection had blinded them to a fundamental truth. Wars are won not by the best tanks, but by the best tank crews, supplied by the best logistics, supported by the best combined arms coordination, and backed by the most sustainable industrial base. At Aracourt, 5 American tin cans proved that in modern warfare, the sum of the system will always defeat even the most perfect individual component. Staff Sergeant Poole's "In the Mood" would go on to destroy 12 German tanks before the war's end, not because it was invincible, but because it was part of something larger than itself. That, more than any thickness of armor, was the true strength that won World War II. "For the boy," he said, in broken German. His accent twisted the words, but the meaning was unmistakable. Clara's breath caught. The plate gleamed like treasure. She felt every instinct screaming to pull her children back, but Matthias's eyes fixed on the food, wide with hunger and wonder. For a moment, the years of indoctrination cracked. She saw not an enemy, but a young man, barely older than some of the Hitler Youth boys she had watched march through Aachen before the Americans came. A soldier offering food, not threats. Her lips parted, but no words came. Finally, she nodded, just slightly. Matthias stepped forward. His small hands trembled as he accepted the plate. He looked up at his mother, then back at the soldier, then down at the food. And for the first time in years, he smiled. That moment marked the beginning of Clara Hoffman's unraveling world. In the days to come, she would return again and again to that courtyard, watching her children eat food that German civilians had been told could not possibly exist in the enemy's possession. She would meet the soldiers, hear their voices, and see firsthand the abundance that her government had told her was a lie. And with every plate of bacon, every slice of white bread, and every glass of milk handed to her children by the enemy, a piece of her old world, the one carefully constructed by propaganda, began to crumble. Because what Clara saw in that courtyard was not just a kitchen. It was the collapse of 12 years of belief, brought down not by bombs or bullets, but by the smell of breakfast drifting through ruined streets. The next morning, Clara Hoffman woke with the same smell in her memory: bacon, eggs, and bread. She tried to ignore it, tried to convince herself that yesterday had been a strange dream brought on by hunger. But Matthias was already tugging at her sleeve. "Mutti, can we go again?" he whispered. She hesitated. It had been risky enough once, but something inside her, perhaps the memory of her son's smile as he tasted bacon for the first time in years, told her she couldn't deny him. So, after wrapping themselves in patched coats, Clara, Matthias, and Lotta slipped once again through the rubble-strewn streets toward the courtyard. When they arrived, they were not alone. At least 24 children were already lined up, their faces thin but expectant. A few mothers lingered nearby, hesitant as Clara had been. The same American cooks worked the stoves, steam rising in the cold morning. And once again they served not scraps, but full plates: eggs, meat, and bread. This time, when an American lieutenant noticed Clara, he smiled. "Back again?" he asked in slow, careful German. Clara nodded, feeling her cheeks burn. The man handed Matthias a plate piled higher than before. He looked at Lotta next, then at Clara. "For all," he said simply. He gestured toward the line, as if to reassure them that it was allowed. Clara swallowed hard and accepted. When she handed her daughter the food, Lotta froze. The Hitler Youth meetings still echoed in her mind. She remembered the slogans drilled into her. "The enemy is greedy. The enemy is weak. Never trust the enemy." She stared at the plate for several minutes before taking a bite. The taste was overwhelming, rich, warm. It filled her mouth in a way that German rations hadn't in years. And though she tried to hold on to what she had been taught, the propaganda crumbled just a little more with every bite. By the third visit, Clara brought all 3 of her children. Her eldest, Karl, age 14, had been the most resistant. His Hitler Youth training had been thorough. When he first saw the field kitchen, he crossed his arms and muttered, "Enemy food, poison." But his defiance lasted less than 10 minutes. The smell broke him first. Then the sight of Matthias and Lotta eating, their faces glowing with relief. Finally, hunger won. He accepted a plate reluctantly, then devoured it silently. Afterward, Karl bombarded the soldiers with questions in halting English and broken German. "Do you eat like this every day?" One of the cooks, a stocky man with dark hair and a New York accent, laughed. This is nothing. Back home, we eat bigger." Karl blinked, stunned. He couldn't imagine eating more than what he had just eaten. As the visits continued, Clara began noticing details that disturbed her almost as much as the food itself. The Americans handed out food casually, without hesitation. They seemed to have more than enough to give away. Their supplies, sacks of flour, boxes of chocolate, cartons of milk powder, stacked up in the courtyard like treasures. And it wasn't only food. Clara saw soldiers unwrap bandages that looked new and clean, while in German hospitals bandages were boiled, washed, and reused until they disintegrated. She saw children sipping real milk, not the thin substitutes she had rationed at home. She even overheard one American grumbling about too many crates of bacon, as if the abundance were a burden. For years, Joseph Goebbels had told Germans that American plenty was a lie, a myth designed to deceive them. On the radio, they had heard that U.S. soldiers were ill-fed, poorly supplied, and unable to endure European winters. But here, in her own city, was living proof of the opposite. The contrast was impossible to ignore. That night, Clara sat by candlelight, her children asleep in their corner of the cellar. The words of propaganda swirled in her mind, clashing with the reality she had seen. Americans are starving, but their children drank milk. Americans are cruel, but a soldier had bent down to tie Matthias's shoelace when it came undone. Americans are weak, but their trucks rumbled endlessly through Aachen, their soldiers healthy and strong. For the first time in years, Clara wondered if everything she had been told was a lie. News of the field kitchens spread quickly. Families who had once muttered angrily about the invaders now found themselves whispering in awe at the Americans' generosity. Some still held back, convinced it was a trick. Others, like Clara, came again and again, each visit chipping away at their old beliefs. One evening, she overheard her son Carl speaking with another boy, both of them newly stuffed with American food. "They told us America was poor," Carl said, shaking his head. "But they have so much, they give it away." "Maybe." He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Maybe we've been lied to." The other boy nodded slowly. For Clara, the words were both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying, because if the enemy had been telling the truth all along, what did that mean about Germany's leaders? About her husband at the front? About the sacrifices demanded from her family? And liberating, because the truth was finally breaking through. Not through leaflets, not through speeches, but through plates of food, steaming in the hands of children who had forgotten what it meant to be full. By Christmas, the Hoffman family had become regulars at the American kitchen. On Christmas Eve, the soldiers organized something that left Clara speechless. They handed out candy, real candy, to the children. They gave cigarettes to the adults. And for dinner, they served turkey, ham, pies, and even cranberry sauce. A strange red dish the Americans claimed was tradition. Clara could hardly believe it. The feast before her eyes surpassed anything she had seen even before the war. One soldier told her almost casually, "Every American soldier in Europe gets turkey for Christmas. Every single one." The words struck Clara harder than any bomb could. The thought that hundreds of thousands of soldiers scattered across the continent could all receive such abundance, while her own children had nearly starved, made her chest ache. That night, she lay awake, staring into the dark, realizing the truth she had never dared to think before. Germany could not win this war. By the turn of the year, the Hoffman family had fallen into a strange new rhythm. Each morning, Clara's children begged to return to the courtyard. Each time, she told herself it would be the last. And each time, hunger and curiosity carried them back. But in late December, their encounters widened beyond breakfast. It began with Dr. Elise Bauer, a local physician who had stayed in Aachen despite evacuation orders. Clara met her by chance near the field kitchen, where Bauer whispered urgently, "It's not just the food, Frau Hoffman. I've seen their hospital. You would not believe it." Clara frowned. German hospitals had been stripped bare long before the Americans arrived. Bandages were reused until they dissolved. Morphine and antibiotics had vanished. Even soap was scarce. But Dr. Bauer insisted, and the following day she guided Clara to the outskirts of the city. There, in a former schoolhouse, the Americans had set up a field hospital, and what Clara saw inside left her dizzy. Rows of clean beds, sheets so white they gleamed, shelves stacked with bottles and boxes, bandages in abundance, bottles of plasma hanging above patients like something from another world. She watched as a medic unwrapped a fresh, sterile dressing for a soldier's minor wound, then tossed the used cloth aside, tossed it away, as if it were worthless. Clara's breath caught. In German clinics, bandages were washed, dried, patched, and reused until they fell apart. But here, the Americans discarded them without hesitation. "They even have penicillin for ordinary infections," Dr. Bauer whispered. "Penicillin for civilians. We haven't seen it in years." Clara felt her knees weaken. If this was what they treated as ordinary, what unimaginable reserves must they hold? Her eldest son, Carl, grew restless. The food had won him over, but his fascination soon turned toward American machinery. One afternoon, he returned from wandering with eyes wide, words tumbling out of him. "Mutti, you must see their motor pool. So many trucks, so many jeeps. They don't even fix them when they break. They just bring new ones." At first, Clara dismissed this as exaggeration, but when she finally accompanied Carl, she found he had understated the truth. A vast lot stretched before her, filled with rows upon rows of vehicles. Jeeps, half-tracks, fuel tankers, repair trucks, even machines she had never seen before. Mobile kitchens, road graders, and radio trucks. Lieutenant James Wilson, a young officer from Chicago, noticed her staring. With a grin, he explained in halting German, "This? Just one regiment. Division has dozens. Clara's breath caught. She had watched German soldiers drag supplies by horse cart and seen neighbors' cars seized and left useless for lack of fuel. Yet here, Americans had more vehicles than they seemed to know what to do with. Her eyes widened further when she saw a jeep towed in, its side mangled from a mine. Mechanics stripped it for parts, then rolled the carcass aside. Hours later, a new jeep arrived to replace it. Carl was transfixed. "They treat them like toys," he whispered, "not treasures." Clara could only nod. The more she saw, the more unbearable the contrast became. In her own home, every scrap of cloth was patched, and every crust of bread was saved. Waste was a crime, drilled into every German household. Yet here, Americans threw away what her family would have treasured. Fuel burned freely in their trucks. Soldiers handed out chocolate bars to children as if they were nothing. Cigarettes were tossed casually to civilians. What her government had told her was impossible, the idea that Americans had endless supplies, was now undeniable. By Christmas, hundreds of Aachen's remaining civilians were visiting the Americans daily. The field kitchen became more than a place for food. It was a gathering ground, a strange new kind of community. Clara noticed how her children were changing. Matthias clung to the soldiers, picking up English words with childlike ease. His laughter returned, bright and unguarded, something she had not heard since the bombings began. Carl lingered at the motor pool, absorbing everything he could about engines and machines. He had stopped wearing his Hitler Youth armband, quietly tucking it away. Even Lotta, once cautious and defiant, now hummed softly when peeling an orange given to her by an American sergeant. An orange. She had not held one since she was a small girl. Clara herself felt torn in two. Relief washed through her each time she saw her children eat, but guilt gnawed at her. Guilt for doubting her leaders, for accepting the enemy's charity, for realizing the propaganda had lied. Yet every visit deepened her doubt. One evening, Sergeant Michael Romano, the Brooklyn cook who had taken a liking to the Hoffman family, invited Clara to see the supply truck being unloaded. She watched in disbelief as crate after crate emerged. Sacks of flour and sugar, tins of coffee, cartons of powdered eggs, slabs of bacon, boxes of chocolate, canned fruit. Enough, she thought, to feed her entire neighborhood for months. And Romano laughed. "This is light shipment. Wait till Christmas dinner." When Christmas came, she understood what he meant. The delivery defied imagination. Turkeys, hams, cranberries, ingredients for pies and cakes, so much that soldiers complained of not having enough storage. Lieutenant Prescott, the same who had first offered food to Matthias, remarked casually, "Every American gets turkey for Christmas. It's tradition." Every American. Across Europe. The thought staggered Clara. How could a nation feed not just its civilians, but hundreds of thousands of soldiers scattered across a continent? In that instant she realized, this war had never been winnable. The Americans' true weapon was not their guns or tanks, but their abundance. And now, Clara could see it everywhere. In the food her children devoured, in the trucks that rolled endlessly, in the discarded bandages, in the casual laughter of soldiers who seemed untouched by scarcity. For Clara Hoffman, the collapse of belief came not with a roar, but with the quiet clatter of plates in a courtyard. The Reich had promised victory, but standing amid American plenty, she knew the war was already lost. By January of 1945, word of the Americans' abundance had spread through Aachen like wildfire. What began as hesitant whispers had grown into open acknowledgement. Families who once cursed the invaders now stood in line at the field kitchens. Children who once saluted with rigid arms now laughed with American soldiers, clutching chocolate bars and chewing gum. For many, the change came reluctantly. A slow surrender not to force of arms, but to force of reality. Clara noticed it most in her neighbors. Frau Meyer, a seamstress whose husband and sons were all at the front, had once lectured sternly about German sacrifice and American weakness. But one evening she confessed in a hushed voice, "They gave my little Anna milk today. Real milk. I haven't seen milk in 2 years." Another neighbor, Herr Becker, a retired school teacher, clung to old arguments. "They may have more," he muttered, "but German engineering is superior. German spirit cannot be matched." Yet his words rang hollow as he smoked an American cigarette, his first in months, and watched children eat white bread he could no longer deny existed. The contradictions grew sharper by the day. Letters and journals began to capture the shift. One evening, Clara sat with her daughter Lotta, who had been quietly writing in her small notebook. When Clara peeked over her shoulder, she read, "The Americans give us food. They laugh with us. They fix our streets with machines I've never seen before. Were we lied to? If they are poor and weak, how do they feed us when our own leaders cannot? Clara felt her throat tighten. She could not scold her daughter, for she had asked the same questions herself. The truth spread not only through food, but through infrastructure. Refugees from nearby towns told incredible stories. Bridges rebuilt in days, rubble cleared with massive bulldozers, supply depots stretching farther than the eye could see. One man, an engineer named Weber, who had been forced to build German fortifications before capture, spoke in disbelief. "I saw an American depot near St. Vith. Hundreds of trucks and jeeps lined up like a city. They stacked ammunition higher than houses, and they said more was coming, that the pipeline was full." For Germans who had grown used to scarcity, to saving every scrap of cloth, to hoarding potato peelings, the idea of an enemy worried not about shortage but about excess was nearly impossible to grasp. At home, the Hoffman children absorbed the transformation in their own ways. Matthias carried a baseball cap given to him by a soldier, wearing it proudly as though it were a crown. Lotta practiced English phrases in secret, whispering them at night as if rehearsing for a future she could barely imagine. And Karl no longer spoke of Hitler youth drills. Instead, he lingered by the motor pool, learning words like engine, spare part, and radio. For Clara, these changes were both comforting and frightening. Comforting, because her children's laughter had returned. Frightening, because she knew their words, if overheard, could brand them traitors. But the more she saw, the harder it became to deny. One evening, Clara helped clean after meal distribution. As she stacked empty tins, Sergeant Romano spoke quietly. "Tomorrow, supply trucks bring more. Always more, you'll see." And she did. The next morning, crates of sugar, coffee, powdered eggs, bacon, and chocolate were unloaded in staggering quantities, enough to feed hundreds daily, and still more to spare. Romano chuckled at her expression. "And this, only one regiment. The whole army gets the same." The words echoed in her mind long after she left. If this was what one regiment received, what did the entire American force command? The whispers grew louder. In basements and kitchens, civilians began to ask questions that only months earlier would have been unthinkable. If America can do this, why are we still told they are starving? If they are so weak, why do their trucks never stop? If they are poor, why do their soldiers hand chocolate to our children? And the most dangerous question of all, did our leaders know? Clara herself asked it silently, night after night. Did Hitler, Goebbels, and the others understand that they had plunged Germany into a war that could not be won? Had they sacrificed millions knowing the truth? The collapse of belief was not dramatic. It did not happen with a sudden proclamation or a single revelation. Instead, it happened in small, undeniable moments. The taste of butter melting on bread, the sight of new boots handed to a child, the hum of an American generator lighting a street that had been dark for months. Every moment chipped away at the edifice of propaganda, leaving only rubble. By February, Clara no longer bothered to hide her thoughts. She confided to Dr. Bauer, "The Americans plan as if victory is certain. They talk of rebuilding even while they fight. They are not afraid." The doctor nodded grimly. "They have so much they can fight and rebuild at the same time. We sacrifice everything to fight, and still we lose." Clara knew then that what she had sensed since Christmas was true. The war had been decided not on battlefields, but in factories oceans away. The smell of bacon had been only the beginning. By March of 1945, Aachen no longer whispered. The truth had broken free from kitchens and motor pools, spreading into homes, cellars, and gatherings. What began as private doubt had become open conversation. They knew. Hans Becker, the retired schoolteacher, declared one evening at Clara's home. His voice trembled with anger as he tapped the ash from his American cigarette. "Hitler, Goebbels, Speer, all of them. They had the reports. They must have known America could outproduce us 100 times over, and yet they sent our sons to die." No one argued. Not even Becker himself, who only weeks earlier had clung to the idea of German superiority. Around him, neighbors nodded in grim silence. The Reich had promised victory. Instead, it had delivered hunger, rubble, and betrayal. The most haunting testimonies came from returning prisoners. One man, a Wehrmacht officer named Hoffman, who had been briefly held in a U.S. camp before release, told the gathering, "They fed us 3 meals a day, more than our own army ever gave us. Cigarettes, coffee, clean beds. Their prisoners eat better than our children." Gasps filled the room. The statement cut deeper than any bomb. If even captured Germans lived better under the Americans, what did that say about the Reich's promises? The realization spread like fire. Letters discovered later revealed the agony of the moment. One woman wrote, "We were told America was collapsing. that they were weak. But I have seen their trucks, their food, and their medicines. They give chocolate to our children while our leaders give them hunger. Have we been fighting for a lie? For Clara Hoffman, the answer had already crystallized. Her children no longer spoke of Hitler Youth songs. Carl wore an American field jacket with the insignia removed, a gift from a sympathetic sergeant. Lotta practiced English each night, writing phrases in her notebook by candlelight. Matthias carried a baseball cap and begged soldiers to teach him words. One evening, Carl summed up what all three had begun to believe. Germany told us we were the strongest, but the Americans, he paused, searching for the words. They have so much they don't even need all of it. How could we ever win? Clara had no answer. The city itself bore proof of the imbalance. Within weeks of occupation, the Americans had restored water to neighborhoods, powered streetlights with new generators, and cleared rubble with machines. What Germany's leaders had said was impossible. The enemy achieved almost casually, and still, propaganda broadcasts sputtered through radios, promising secret weapons and final victory. No one believed them anymore. By April, the conversations had shifted from survival to betrayal. We were lied to, muttered Frau Meyer, her eyes hollow. Lied to, while our children starved. They told us America was poor, said Herr Becker bitterly, but it was Germany that was poor. Poor in food, poor in truth. Even the most faithful had begun to curse the names of their leaders. The Reich had not simply lost the war, it had lost the trust of its people. For Clara, the moment of full clarity came one afternoon as she watched her children eat in the courtyard. The smell of bacon still clung to the air, familiar now, almost comforting. She thought of her husband, somewhere on the collapsing front, perhaps hungry, perhaps already gone. She thought of the years of speeches, the parades and the slogans, of the sacrifices demanded, of the fear instilled, and she thought of how it had all unraveled not through argument, but through a plate of food handed to her son by a smiling enemy. Years later, she would write, "The bombs did not break us. Hunger did not break us. Even defeat did not break us. What broke us was the truth, laid bare in something as simple as breakfast. We were told we were masters, yet we ate from the enemy's hand. The smell of bacon in the ruins did what no weapon could. It destroyed belief." When the war ended weeks later, Aachen's civilians met the news not with shock, but with weary acceptance. The collapse had already taken place in their hearts. For Clara, the memory of that December morning never faded. The moment she smelled bacon drifting through rubble was the moment she began to see the truth. A truth that Germany's leaders had hidden. A truth the Americans revealed not with leaflets, not with speeches, but with abundance. And in that truth lay the most absolute defeat of all.